Okay, and something that I thought was a bit of a surprise yesterday, the COVID Commission, the Royal Commission, that was originally, as I said to you, led by Professor Tony Blakely, and included John Whitehead and Hikaya Parata, and she left and has been replaced by Grant Illingworth, and there's a story there because he's going to take over phase 2 of this particular inquiry. But anyhow, reported or announced that it was going to report. If it hasn't already, we'll check out with John in just a second. The original, or its first report, and I presume only report on this, with all the subsequent recommendations. The interesting thing is that there's been high-level discussion about this from both Professor Tony Blakely and John Whitehead. As I said, we're talking to John just a sec. But the actual recommendations, I don't know that they've been published yet, and I'm not sure if the report is available, the publication yet either. It's gone to Brooke Van Velden, who's in charge of the Royal Commission and who named, I think, the 3 commissioners for the next phase, which is Judy Kavanagh, Anthony Hill and Grant Illingworth, who's a KC. I wonder if he's one of the ones that signed the letter. Anyhow, I imagine not. Joining us now, though, and he's talked to us before and been very generous with his time, is Royal Commissioner John Whitehead, and he joins us now. John, thank you very much for joining us again. I know this is your last interview, and then what are you doing? Sloping off back into private life, are you?
I wish, yeah. Thank you, Michael, and lovely to talk to you and your listeners. I'll be getting back to my work with St John Ambulance and the work we do there and a range of other boards that I'm involved in and so on. So still lots to do. Yep.
Good on you. Listen, I'm surprised. Am I surprised to be surprised? Was it always intended that you were going to talk about the report yesterday and give some idea of what was in it? Was that always designed to be? Because I think it came out a bit of a surprise to many in the media.
I think the intention has just been to highlight that we are reporting today. The report actually hasn't yet gone to the Minister. It will go this afternoon, early this afternoon. But all completed and everything and ready to go. So it's to highlight that. I can't talk about the detail of what the report says. I can give you a broad outline of what we cover, but obviously that's, it's, the Minister has to have received that first, and then she makes the call about releasing it.
Okay. Was there a reason why you went public, John, prior to giving her the report? I don't know what Royal Commissions do, but I wouldn't have thought they usually do that. Did you do that for a reason? Well, of course you did. What was the reason?
I think just to highlight that we're finishing phase 1 of the report now and handing over phase 2, which you've just outlined how that goes. Phase 2 is slightly different. It'll have the opportunity to go in greater depth on 2 or 3 areas than we have, because we had an extremely wide brief. And also there's 1 or 2 areas which were outside our terms of reference, which will be inside their terms of reference, which they will report on. So
there was a fair bit of criticism initially when the Royal Commission was set up for having a relatively narrow terms of reference, and also, as we've both talked about before, you and I, Professor Tony Blakely heading it. He said yesterday, I think one of the comments that I read and you would have seen as well, John, as he said, well, people will be a bit surprised when they read the report. They'll, essentially know that I wasn't a plant of Jacinda Ardern. Was that something that you picked up in your travels?
There was criticism of Tony's appointment, but he'd been through the process. He has acted completely independently and with integrity, in my view. And what he says about the report, I think, is right. It is much wider and broader than people realise. I mean, just to give you a very quick rundown, we'll be talking about the whole process of risk management and how we approach that, the elimination strategy, lockdowns, borders, quarantine, how the health system coped, obviously the economic impacts and the effects on business, social impacts, the vaccine rollout, and the mandatory measures of one sort or another. So, pretty broad sweep. So phase 2 will be useful in going into more detail on one of the 2 or 3 of those areas.
So you expect phase 2 to build on phase 1, or perhaps to come up with contradictory views? I don't know. What would you expect?
Look, they will act very independently as well. There's some really good people on phase 2, I think you outlined, who are in there. I suspect that a lot of what they will find won't be inconsistent with what we've found, because there's it's the same thing that they're looking at. But look, they may find a few different things. They may have a slightly different angle, and there's absolutely no harm in that. What I think is useful is to get phase 1 reported and get on with preparation for the next event, whatever that will be. Hopefully not soon, but there will be future pandemics. Excuse me.
The headlines this morning from Radio New Zealand and New Zealand Herald relate to the mandates to a large extent. That's what they've concentrated on, the mainstream media.
Right.
COVID-19 inquiry head asks if vaccine mandates were too harsh. Vaccine mandates undeniably eroded trust, harm some New Zealanders, are the headlines. Is that in accord with your view?
Look, what I would say, Michael, and I would look forward in this, I think what we have found is that, like all countries, we were dealing with a very difficult situation, and we didn't know what we were expecting. And so there were some very good things done, and then there's some other things that have happened that we say, well, actually, now we know that, we could perhaps do things in a different way going forward. So I think particularly the angle I would put it on it is the better prepared we are, the more scope we have to limit the use of some of the hardest, most difficult mechanisms. I would never rule them out because you don't know how serious the next one will be. It could be a lot more serious than COVID, hopefully not. But we certainly, by better preparation, by better readiness to surge on contact tracing that's available, by better use of other devices that are less intrusive, you may be able to limit the more difficult ones.
Trust seems to have been the greatest casualty between many features or communities of the public and between the state and also the mainstream media, I can say too, John. Do you touch on that in your inquiry?
Yeah, look, we think that whole issue of trust is very important, and social cohesion more generally. Look, in an event like this, people are always going to disagree. We take different views on these things, and I think we have to learn to listen better. We have to learn to be able to talk to each other, and also to disagree well when we do disagree. But by listening really well to each other, we may not end up doing exactly what people want, but we can at least take into account what their concerns are and try and mitigate those.